Hey all, Mac here. This is going to be covering my Int Stacking Wander, which I've been playing in Hardcore Necropolis. And I've gotten to a point where the build feels pretty good for what I'm doing, which is basically just mapping. And it's kind of ready to be converted to a different build. But I wanted to go over kind of my method of building this character, as well as some of the key things in case you want to build this character. And most importantly, also kind of just espouse how much I love this archetype. Wanders are always really fun. It's really straightforward on scaling. You're basically just stacking a shit ton of int. And you can really transition this build to a couple other things. Primarily Blade Trap, but I'll go over that later. So I think first and foremost, you want to craft the gear for this build before you actually try to put it together. And you're going to be speccing stuff around what gear you can craft. Now, if you have a very high budget, just go Mage Blood. Makes the build a lot better. Covers a lot of the issues that the build struggles with. Primarily trying to get certain suffix modifiers, which Mage Blood just helps out a lot with. And of course, if you're not going Mage Blood, there are some other alternatives, and I will go over all of those. First and foremost, we are playing Trickster because Hardcore League, and this build is actually very playable on an Occultist, though I would actually recommend Trickster if you want to scale the build a lot higher, as the defensive options are just absurd. So, one step ahead is just really good action speed, and also a highly coveted defensive layer. It just slows down everything around you, which is really nice. Polymath is really good just for damage scaling and recovery. Escape Artist is massive. We are getting a good 400 ES from the body armor and a good 1300 evasion from the helmet. And I cannot understate this enough. It is important. It is vital to have a high evasion, high ES body armor. As a Trickster with Escape Artist. And if you're not playing Escape Artist, I don't know what you're doing on Trickster. Soul Drinker is just really good for ES Leech. This is kind of how this build recovers through maps. And the Energy Leech not removed on full ES is really strong to keep the damage from our Energy Leech support going. Also, this is a massive defense layer. And yeah, it's just a really good ascendancy. Spellbreaker has a sort of you could take this, but I personally wouldn't recommend it unless you're going Blade Trap. So, with Polymath, we're taking a lot of masteries, and some of these masteries are very important for the build. I want to first go over the notables. So we are CI, meaning chaos damage is not an issue, and Ghost Reaver, which is very good for energy leech and recovery. We obviously can't recharge, so that means don't stand in degen, and Ghost Dance, which my evasion rating right now without flasks is 93%, right? So that's, with 48k, I am recovering a lot with Ghost Dance, which is also a massive defensive layer if I do end up getting hit. And so this tree is relatively flexible. You can take out Pierce and just run Pierce support if you really wanted to. But a lot of this kind of wants to stay as well. So some of the big ones are the wand masteries. You want spell damage scaling with wands. It just helps you get more damage from your gear. And you also want intelligence is added to accuracy rating, because it's hard to find accuracy since it is a suffix most of the time, and it's a pain with how suffix starved this gearing is. So this is a notable that you really want. There is another notable over here which gives Fizz converted to lightning. If you have a high Fizz damage wand, you want to play that. Over here, if you have a really high ES shield, which you honestly should, you get, a good chunk of crit multi. This shield is currently giving me 43% crit multi, which is just, it's nice. As a CI build, you're going to struggle with stuns, so instead you take this, 50% of your ES is added to stun threshold. This is really nice just for making mapping smoother, and kind of lets you stand still more. Now, one thing to note, since we are CI, any Fizz conversion, Fizz damage from hits converted to chaos, is going to be basically just mitigation. I had that on the helmet mod, and I have this mastery, which is really massive. Also, inverted Ellie res from monsters is really big for damage. It's relatively inconsistent, but that's kind of whatever. Beyond that, it's just power charge scaling. I am not suppress capped, but with such a large HP pool, and this is around 85% effective res since we're taking lucky suppress, You can go for a suppression suffix on the body armor, but it's just such a pain to roll suppression on everything that I kind of just stopped. I'm running a large cluster currently that has double explode. This is just helpful for mapping. You can find a lot of good like damage mods on Abyss Jewels, which is kind of where I would scale some damage. And obviously a good Watcher's Eye will carry the build quite far. The 8% chance to evade while affected by Grace is so underrated. I feel like this is insane. Like, the amount of evasion you need to get higher, because the DR scaling is very, very difficult to get. However, this just gives plus 8% flat. Hence, I'm at 93%, 2% off cap, which is really nice. I think with a flask, I might be capped, actually. Almost. You see, with a 59% increased evasion, it only goes up 1%. That's how difficult it is to scale, and I went up a raw value of like 5k. Obviously this damage pen from Wrath is just like, it's not necessary. I would honestly go for the Grace if you're hardcore, but you could just get a full damage Watcher's Eye instead if that's what you want. It shouldn't gimp the defenses by too much. But yeah, the tree again is kind of flexible based on your gear, and so this one can be crafted a couple of different ways. I did not go for an Awakener Award because I hate that crafting method, and I felt it was kind of unnecessary. But now looking back at it, it is like 10% more DPS. You get the 1% spell damage per 16 int mod in the prefix. Again, just more annoying to craft and a lot more expensive. This method, I just alt spammed for the Shaper prefix mod, and then from there I did 6633s to get the damage pen mod, and after that it's prefix lock and reforge crit and hope you don't fill. I got lucky with the crit multi. Even without that, it's still fine, but ideally you want another decent mod, so like accuracy could actually be helpful too. You do want some sort of crit chance and attack speed on the one though. The helmet itself is a good place to find accuracy, but you generally just want high ES. The Corel mod I think is worthwhile for sacrificing some ES. I got the hybrid flat ES, which is kind of unfortunate, but it's whatever. The increased area effect was actually a fraction I got from grave crafting, and that actually might be nicer for blade trap. So yeah, the primary conversion from this build is going to be to blade trap, which is going to be just better for single target. And of course this build lacks single target because it's a Wander, and it's a lot more difficult to scale that. Our primary skill is Power Siphon. You know, I'm using Wed. Damage on full life, since we're always full life, it's just more damage. Lightning Pen, which is really just helps with single target. Inspiration, which helps us deal with mana cost issues, as well as gives us a lot of crit and LE damage. And Energy Leech, which is just really good synergy with Trickster. So to show how fast I get inspiration charges, obviously, I go to 5 inspiration charges pretty quickly, and then I'll just sit here for a really long time because my Power Siphon costs 2 mana. This comes at the cost of 2 prefixes on jewelry, but this is definitely worth it with how I'm playing the build. Obviously, you can craft flat or, you know, % ES here if you really wanted to instead, if you had a different way of dealing with mana issues. And one thing to note is that this does also gimp my sigil power scaling. I don't really fill stages. I just kind of stick with one stage. But yeah, Amulet, you're going for in all attributes ideally. You can upgrade this to a Simplex Amulet later, which is absurdly expensive, but that is literally just int attributes and damage per int, which is really hard to roll. But, you know, that's still kind of worth getting later if you're really down to scale the build. Before this, I guess Estramentus is okay. I personally don't like that amulet very much. So I would just try to get one with like lower percent, like a smaller value for the implicit if it's cheaper, but really try to go for like a % and implicit on this and the belt. And of course the belt's the same thing. You just get whatever suffixes you need. You always want int and ES ideally. The shield, you just really want high ES. Open suffixes. If you want to craft % spell suppression, that is an option. I decided again just to give up on spell suppress cap, and so I'm getting more damage from attack speed. Rings are going to be fractured int. This is the first step sort of in the upgrade set. So you really just want to, you know, craft woes, and you just look for the suffixes that you need. Again, this build kind of needs suffix modifiers, specifically like int and res. Since you need int, you're already taking away one suffix modifier from pretty much all your gear. So finding res is kind of difficult actually, unless you're like rolling really high values for them. So that's really important. But also you need strength and dex to just use gems and gear. So again, you need to find this somewhere. It doesn't really matter where, but you do want int on every piece, and you want to cover all your bases, right? As far as the boots go, again, ES and res is nothing too interesting. For the gloves, rage is really nice. It just makes mapping faster, and it kind of gives you a sort of cooldown use to increase your damage by a ton with berserk. I'm also using the damage while leeching. It's just a 43% increased damage modifier, which is really nice for this build. I had to settle on T3 int because Eldritch currency spamming on this is very expensive, and I really wouldn't recommend it. If you can just get the prefixes locked, you can just use an int essence, which is going to be a lot cheaper. Yep. The body armor, really, you just like, you want to primarily look for those 3 prefix modifiers and then just go from there. You can int spam for spell suppression, which is hundreds of in essences, so it's really expensive, but again, that's kind of if you want to go for a suppress cap. You do want the 6% increased attributes craft from Hillock in the suffix if you want, which is of course another suffix modifier. I am currently not really able to ditch one of the reses here for intelligence. I could, but the actual crafting process of that is again going to be really annoying because I didn't get triple fracture. So this is kind of going to sit where it is, but that's another like 70 or so int onto the build, which would be kind of nice, but I calced it and it's around 4% damage, so it's not really worth the currency investment, especially when I want to swap builds. As far as the flasks go, you can kind of run a different set of things. You could go quartz, jade, and maybe sulfur for more damage if you wanted to. I like running the trielles because, first of all, I got really lucky rolling the mods for these, but then also, like, it's a good bit of, like, extra defenses, you know? Like, you have all these up and you're 80% LE res capped, which is pretty nice. And, yeah, the actual playstyle of the build is really simple. It's literally just power siphon spam. It'll fire projectiles at enemies. You don't really need extra projectiles on this at all. It'll just fire, you know, it fires up to 7 projectiles at people, so it's like pretty good on its own. And the actual like playstyle of the build is very chill. You're going to be using Power Sigil to stand still and just hit mobs. Evolve Power Siphon can't miss, so if you find evasive monsters, it's a good place to use this. I wouldn't use this regularly unless you're just feeling like pressing the button. I'm running an extra aura. You don't need clarity. I just have it for a tiny bit of mana regen, but more importantly for the 8% damage per aura affecting me. And I also don't really like feel the mana loss from it, so that's why I'm running it. But obviously clarity is not necessary. If you get a Watcher's Eye with evade, clarity, and like some wrath mod, you've kind of won the lottery, like the clarity ES mod. But again, not necessary whatsoever. Yeah, the build itself can also use some uniques. So Oxium is a very good belt to find leech and LE damage scaling. It actually performs close to this. I just wanted res from the belt though. As far as the helmet goes, you can run Crown of Eyes for leech, and it gives you 150% spell damage scaling for wand attacks, which is going to give you more damage. It does come at the cost of losing 30% fire res, as well as a helmet slot. Now, that being said, you can get max power charge corrupt on it, which is quite powerful for this build, but that's probably going to be relatively expensive. So if you want to look out for that, it's not a bad option either. As far as skill goes, Enduring Cry is not really there for the regen. I'm not taking Zealot's Oath. It's there for the endurance charges. Sigil powers are standstill. Sniper's Mark and Mark on Hit is a very big single target damage boost. I even run an Enhance with it because it just helps out so much for the damage. But you generally want this setup. Berserk is going to be really nice just for giving us a big boost of damage for when we encounter like a tanky rare. Mortal Call is my cast when damage taken setup. You can run Steel Skin here if you want as well. You don't want Molten Shell obviously because you have no armor. And yeah, Precision Clarity. You need Enlighten for this build, so I'm running Grace, Discipline, Wrath. I guess Herald of Thunder is an option, but I wouldn't really do that compared to running Wrath here. And of course our links are Wed, and yeah, it's a very expensive build to set up, but I think it's a really fun build. And yeah, I'm gonna be converting this to Blade Trap Trickster, as the build does suffer a relatively bad single target damage profile, so playing something like Blade Trap is kind of a nice change of pace. And again, the gear transition is not bad whatsoever. It's actually very smooth, and you can use almost every piece, obviously besides the wand and a couple other like mods. But yeah, till next time, ciao.